sit and talk about old man.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Tuesday, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. That was the great Randy Travis, of course. I'll never forget the first time I heard that song. I had just been transferred by Thompson McKinnon Securities to the Carolina region. We had acquired a firm, Carolina Securities, and I was a regional person at the time, doing the barbecue tour, as I like to say. But that was a great song, and I'll never forget driving to Kinston and suddenly hearing it for the first time, and that set off a whole new era for country music. Of course, Randy's had a few issues, but haven't we all? Speaking of issues, the Eurozone has had more than its share. So today, the Eurostat research group data agency for the Eurozone released fourth quarter GDP figures. These are quarter over quarter. So, overall, the Eurozone economy shrank 0.6% in the fourth quarter over the third quarter as the recession deepened. Germany's GDP was down 0.6%, France is down 0.3%. Both a little worse than expected. That's over again the previous 3 months. Italy down 0.9%, Spain down 0.7%. For both of those, the sixth straight quarterly decline. Portugal down 1.8%. For all of 2012, Germany was up, but just 0.4%. France was down 0.3% for all of 2012. Spain down 1.8%. Italy down 2.7%. And Portugal down 3.8% for all of 2012. Not good. Finland is also in recession. It was down 0.5% in the fourth quarter over the third and 1.6% for the full year. And I've written in my Week in Review column a lot about Eastern Europe, which is getting lost in all the talk of the periphery. Well, Eastern Europe is a periphery of a different kind, where real bank lending disruptions have occurred. Many of the German and French banks are the chief lenders for nations such as Czech Republic and Hungary. Czech Republic was down 1.7% for all of 2012, Hungary down 2.8%. One other item on France, its manufacturing output fell 2.3% in the fourth quarter after a 0.9% rise in the third. So the government in France is rethinking its 2013 growth forecast. An example of Europe's problems, General Motors, which reported fourth quarter earnings today of $1.19 billion, nonetheless said it lost $699 million in Europe for the quarter and $1.8 billion for the year, versus a loss of $747 million in Europe in 2011. The other day, Ford had reported a loss of $1.75 billion for Europe for 2012 and is now estimating a loss of $2 billion for 2013. Europe is very sick. Still, I get a kick out of those who say things have really stabilized. Maybe in some respects, but I don't see any real growth on the horizon, and we'll get into all the ugly unemployment numbers again next time. Japan They were expecting growth of 0.4% for the fourth quarter. Instead, the preliminary reading is down 0.1% fourth quarter over the third, down 0.4% on an annualized basis. Its third straight down quarter, so of course recession. G20 finance ministers are meeting in Moscow this weekend after a very confusing G7 statement on currencies. So this weekend's meeting of the G20 finance ministers bears watching. Meanwhile, according to data provided by Bloomberg, financial firms around the world have announced over 114,000 layoffs the past year, or 1.6% of their combined workforces. House Speaker John Boehner gave an interview to the Associated Press, and Boehner reiterated his opposition to letting the sequester take effect, serving up a reality check to members of his own caucus who say publicly that they would be willing to let the $85 billion in across-the-board cuts take effect on March 1. Boehner said, "None of them have ever lived under a sequester. For that matter, neither have I. This is going to be a little bleak around here when this actually happens and people actually have to make decisions." Just picked up my copy of the Weekly Standard, February 18th issue. Here's a little snippet from a piece by Fred Barnes. In February 1981, President Reagan was searching for ways to win support for spending cuts. He'd been president less than a month. The national debt was closing in on $1 trillion, and Reagan wanted the public to grasp the danger of owing that much money and thus the need to slash government spending. Reagan had come upon a tantalizing nugget of information. A stack of $1,000 bills totaling $1 trillion would be 80 miles high. But when he informed his speechwriters of this, they were skeptical. They checked with the U.S. Mint. By extrapolating from measurements of $1,000 bills, the Mint determined Reagan was onto something. A $1 trillion stack, it turned out, would be 67 miles high. And so Reagan's speech to Congress on February 18, 1981, included this passage near the top. Quote, "Our national debt is approaching $1 trillion. A few weeks ago I called such a figure incomprehensible, and I've been trying ever since to think of a way to illustrate how big a trillion really is. And the best I could come up with is that if you had a stack of $1,000 bills in your hand, only 4 inches high, you'd be a millionaire. $1 trillion would be a stack of $1,000 bills 67 miles high." Well, that spring, Reagan's spending cuts, most of them were approved by a solidly Democratic House, to the chagrin of Speaker Tip O'Neill, and Reagan's knack for explaining dry economic numbers in plain and uncomplicated terms was an important contributing factor. Barnes continues, "I cite this example of Reagan's gift of political persuasion for 2 reasons. It's instructive, or at least should be. He did what politicians don't do today. He defined economic terms and concepts in easily understandable language. Mitt Romney failed at this in his presidential campaign, and his surrogates, except for Paul Ryan, were just as opaque. Reagan didn't assume voters understood economic jargon. Do they know why the debt to GDP ratio matters? Do they have a clue about the damage a debt crisis would cause? Can they visualize what today's national debt of $16 trillion looks like? Not likely. Reagan would have tutored them so they could. Iran declared it has started installing a new generation of centrifuges for the faster enrichment of uranium at its plant at Natanz. This as it prepares to meet the P5+1 end of the month. This move had been announced. Now it's confirmed it's underway. Iran has indicated that it wants to install about 3,000 machines to produce low enriched uranium at a concentration of 5%. Mark Fitzpatrick, a leading expert on the Iranian program, says Tehran's plan to install the IR-2M could bring forward the date at which Israel and the U.S. judge Iran to be on the verge of acquiring a nuclear bomb. If Iran introduces 3,000 of them as it said it would, this is a very significant increase of production capacity, maybe of around 50%, he said. Fitzpatrick told that to the Financial Times. A senior commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps was assassinated, killed in Syria, making him the highest-ranking Iranian official killed in Syria's civil war, and pointing out Iran's heavy involvement there. And the Iranian embassy in Beirut said in a statement last night that the head of Iran's reconstruction project in southern Beirut had been assassinated by armed terrorists. The head of the UN Human Rights Commission has upped the death toll in Syria from 60,000 to nearly 70,000. At least 9,000 have died thus far this year, according to the UN. A senior Japanese diplomat will visit Beijing next week for talks on the nuclear tests carried out by North Korea. This as tensions between Beijing and Tokyo are still running high over the territorial dispute in the East China Sea. It will be the first Japanese official visit to China since Tokyo alleged last week that the People's Liberation Army had locked fire control radar on a Japanese military helicopter and destroyer in separate incidents last month. So at least they are talking. In the horse meat scandal, in Europe, horse meat has been detected in frozen lasagna on sale in Germany, and supermarkets have started removing the product from their shelves. And British officials said tests showed that a powerful equine drug, phenylbutazone, or better known as bute, could have entered in horse meat. The British Food Standards Agency said it checked the carcasses of 206 horses slaughtered in Britain between January 30th and February 7th, and 8 of them tested positive for the drug. But fear not, at the levels of bute that have been found, a person would have to eat 500 to 600 100% horse meat burgers a day to get close to consuming a human's daily dose. Nonetheless, it's disconcerting. But this just in, French authorities today named a French meat wholesaler, recall this is what the Romanians were saying, as the main culprit in Europe's spreading horse meat scandal, declaring that officials at Spanghero knowingly passed off cheap horse meat as ground beef for frozen food sold around the continent. In Paris, the government's consumer affairs minister said it appeared that fraudulent meat sales had been going on for several months and reached across 13 countries and 28 companies. He said there was plenty of blame to go around, but most of it rested with Spanghero, a wholesaler based in southern France. Some of the meat did still come from Romania. That's the latest we have. If Romania is owed an apology, I will certainly grant them one. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway and a Brazilian private equity firm 3G are acquiring Heinz for $28 billion. Aside from ketchup, Heinz owns brands such as Ore-Ida potatoes. I know I have never been a huge ketchup lover myself. Personally, I love the goodness of horseradish sauce because it detoxifies the liver. Little inside joke there for my friends out there. That's true. And you can buy it at Dollar Tree for $1. This would cost you $30, $40, maybe $50 at any other supermarket. $1 at Dollar Tree. Meanwhile, the Heinz deal will provide shareholders $72.50 a share, a 20% premium on the company's all-time share price. South African double amputee athlete Oscar Pistorius is up on murder charges, with his 29-year-old girlfriend being found with gunshot wounds to the head and upper body this morning at Pistorius' home. At first, there were early reports that Pistorius might have mistaken the girlfriend for an intruder because it was early in the morning. But police say neighbors heard screaming and shouting around the time of the shooting, and they had been called in to investigate incidents of a domestic nature at the same house in the past. So your heart goes out to the victim, her friends, and family. I hope you don't hear all that noise in the background. I did hear the first robin today, so pretty soon we're going to be hearing all kinds of birds back there. Finally, China, the People's Daily, the Communist Party's mouthpiece, warned yesterday in an editorial that Valentine's Day had turned into a breeding ground of corruption and debauchery for a minority of party members. The writer asked why such a romantic holiday in the West, where lovers presented flowers, offered chocolates, horseradish sauce, and sent greeting cards, had transformed into a breeding ground for corruption when it reached the mainland. Someday I am going to unload on China. I'm holding back a ton. From personal experience, I'm being dead serious on this. And I will unload on everybody from incoming President Xi Jinping on down. Mark my word. And there will be some Americans that will be involved in my story too, including American government agencies. I'll be back with you on Tuesday. The markets are closed on Monday. For more stuff, go to stocksnews.com. Again, happy Valentine's Day. Take care.